A truth buried too deep becomes more dangerous than any lie whispered in daylight. They told him to stop saying it. At first, it had been in hushed tones, a few awkward glances from his classmates when he spoke in front of the class about his dad. Then came the snickers. Then the rumors. And then Logan Pike. Logan didn't whisper. He shouted. It was a Tuesday morning, right in the middle of social studies, when Patrick Johannes learned what it really meant to be alone in a room full of people. Mr. Holden had asked the class to stand and share what Veterans Day meant to them. Not in an essay, not in some photocopied worksheet. Just speak. From the heart. And Patrick had. He stood up, hands clenched behind his back, that same stiff spine he used when he practiced walking like his dad had. Shoulders straight, chin up. My dad was a staff sergeant in the Army. His name was Daniel Johannes. He saved lives overseas, but he didn't come back. He hadn't cried, not then. I'm proud of him. I miss him every day, and I think people should remember that not all heroes come home. Mr. Holden nodded, his eyes wet behind those thick lenses of his. But before he could say anything, Logan let out this theatrical sigh, long, loud, and laced with cruelty. "Oh, here we go again," Logan said, Patrick and his imaginary dad. Laughter. First from Logan's side of the room, then from one kid near the window, and then a few more. Patrick didn't flinch. He was used to it by now. The rumors had a life of their own. Logan's older brother, Chase, had apparently gone digging online and couldn't find any record of Daniel Johannes on the Medal of Honor registry. That one piece of missing information had become fuel for Logan's fire. He called Patrick's dad Ghost Soldier and joked about him faking death for attention. Even Mr. Holden's firm, That's Enough Logan, couldn't stop the echo of ridicule that filled the room. The kind of laughter that stays in your ears long after the bell rings. And Patrick just sat down. That night he didn't tell his mom. He almost did. He saw her standing in the kitchen, still in her scrubs from the VA hospital, her hair pulled back, exhaustion tucked beneath her eyes. She was scraping together dinner between folding laundry and checking on their busted heater. What would he even say? "Hey, Mom, Logan Pike says Dad didn't exist." So he went to bed early, staring at the ceiling, mouthing his dad's name again and again like a prayer. The next few days at school blurred together. Whispers in the hall, mock salutes. One kid even hummed taps behind him as he walked to the bathroom. And the teachers? They looked at him with this soft pity, like he was fragile glass, instead of someone who carried his dad's dog tags in his pocket every single day. But he kept his chin up, because Daniel Johannes would. That Friday, Principal Merriweather made the announcement. "Next Thursday, we'll be hosting our annual Veterans Day Assembly." Her voice rang over the intercom, chipper and oblivious. "We're honored to welcome a very special guest, a high-ranking officer who's flown in just to speak with our students about service, sacrifice, and integrity." Patrick froze. He heard Mr. Holden mutter something like "impressive," and the class began buzzing about who it might be. Patrick didn't say a word, but deep down he felt it. That flicker, that quiet, stubborn hope that refused to die, no matter how many times Logan Pike laughed. By lunch, Logan had found him again. "You know, if your dad was such a hero, he'd be the one speaking next week, not some random colonel nobody's ever heard of." Patrick didn't respond. "You should stop lying before someone calls you out. You ever think maybe your mom made the whole thing up? Some people pretend to be Gold Star families for the sympathy." Patrick didn't punch him. He didn't yell. He just stood up, packed his tray, and walked out of the cafeteria with his face like stone. But his knuckles stayed clenched until he got home. That night he sat on the edge of his bed, pulled out the weathered letter tucked inside his dad's old Army field journal, and read it again. The paper was soft from being unfolded so many times. It was dated nearly 11 years ago. The last letter Staff Sergeant Johannes ever wrote. "If you're reading this, Patrick, it means I didn't make it home. But you keep walking proud, son. You tell the truth even if it costs you friends, because your name matters. One day, someone's going to ask you about me, and I want you to answer with your whole chest." Patrick traced the faded ink with his finger. They could call him a liar all they wanted. But his father had told him to stand tall. And next Thursday, when the assembly began, he planned to do exactly that, even if no one stood with him. The Monday before the assembly, Patrick walked into school with his head high, but his stomach knotted so tight it felt like a stone inside him. Every step in the hallway echoed louder than it should. He kept his eyes forward, dog tags thumping against his chest beneath his hoodie, the way they always did. It was his armor. It had to be. Whispers traveled ahead of him like smoke, curling around lockers and inside open classroom doors. Still talking about his fake dad? I heard his mom made it up to get a discount on tuition. I bet he cries during the assembly. None of them said it directly to his face this time. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they were afraid of Mr. Holden. Or maybe, just maybe, they were waiting to see if Thursday would prove him right or wrong. He didn't sit at his usual table during lunch. That spot had become a magnet for tension. Eyes, laughter, pity. Instead, he took his tray to the corner by the janitor's closet and ate in silence, mechanically chewing through overcooked spaghetti and lukewarm applesauce. Nobody sat near him, and honestly, that part hurt less. Mr. Holden found him after class later that day, pulled him aside, gently, one hand on Patrick's shoulder. "You doing all right?" he asked. Patrick nodded. "You sure? You've been quieter than usual." "I'm fine," Patrick said, and for once he almost believed himself. Mr. Holden's eyes dropped to the chain around his neck, the slight bulge under Patrick's hoodie, his lips pressed together. "I know things have been tough lately," he said slowly, choosing every word like it was a piece of glass he didn't want to drop. "But truth doesn't need to shout, Patrick. It just needs to last. You understand?" Patrick nodded again, but the weight of the silence was heavier than ever. That night at home, his mom noticed him staring too long at the picture above the mantel, the photo of Staff Sergeant Patrick Johannes, standing in desert camo next to a group of soldiers, all grinning like they'd just won a bet. His dad stood in the middle, eyes sharp, posture tight, a grin that made Patrick ache just to look at it. "You're thinking about Thursday," his mom said. He didn't answer right away, just kept staring. "They don't believe me," he said, finally. His mom's jaw tightened, but she didn't look surprised. "Does that change what's true?" "No, but it makes it hard to breathe sometimes." She walked over to him, still wearing her name badge from the VA, and wrapped her arms around him. "People forget that grief doesn't have a schedule, and the ones who mock it usually haven't felt it yet." He didn't want comfort, not really. But he leaned into her hug anyway, letting the quiet fill the space between them. On Tuesday, Logan struck again, this time sneakier, meaner. In the hallway before homeroom, someone had taped a paper to Patrick's locker. White, bold font printed out and centered, like some official notice. "Ghosts don't win medals." Below it was a photoshopped image of a soldier kneeling at a grave, but instead of a flag on the casket, it was a cartoon speech bubble, "My son's a liar." Patrick tore it down fast, crumpling it in one motion, stuffing it deep into his pocket before any teachers saw. No one said they did it, but Logan watched from across the hall, arms folded, mouth twisted in that smug smirk, like he'd just won a round. Patrick didn't speak. He didn't even glare. He just walked past him, fire burning behind his eyes. He kept the paper, though, not out of shame, out of memory, because when people eventually claimed they didn't know how cruel it had gotten, he would remember. Wednesday was silent, too silent, the calm before the storm. In music class, their teacher made them rehearse the Star-Spangled Banner again and again for the assembly. Patrick stood behind the second row, his voice barely audible, not because he didn't know the words, but because every time he reached the part about the home of the brave, something in his throat locked up. He thought about his dad carrying wounded men on his back in the Afghan dust. He thought about his mom getting up every day to work a double shift at the VA just to keep their world from falling apart. He thought about Logan Pike and his friends laughing while never having lost a single thing in their lives. Bravery looked a lot different from what the school posters claimed. When the final bell rang, Patrick stayed behind. The empty classroom, the low hum of the fluorescent lights, and the scratched-up piano keys felt like a cathedral in that moment, sacred and full of ghosts. He sat at the old upright piano and played the first few notes of taps with one finger, slow, hollow. Then he stopped, just sat there. That night he laid out his clothes for Thursday. Clean jeans, dress shoes, his dad's old army jacket, too big in the shoulders, sleeves almost swallowing his hands. He'd worn it once before, at the funeral. He remembered not wanting to take it off. He tucked his father's letter into the inside pocket, right over his heart. As he closed his eyes that night, he thought of what Mr. Holden had said. Truth doesn't need to shout, but tomorrow, maybe it finally would. The gym was too bright. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like bees in a jar, reflecting off the polished wooden floor as folding chairs scraped into place. Rows and rows of metal squeaks. Backpacks dropped with careless thuds, the same sticky smell of gym socks and dust they never fully got out of the bleachers. A big red, white, and muted banner stretched across the back wall, honoring our heroes. Veterans Day Assembly. Patrick Johannes sat in the second row with the other sixth graders, his fingers curled tight in the hem of his dad's jacket. It hung off his frame like a draped flag, heavy and warm. A few teachers glanced at him and offered soft smiles. One even patted his shoulder, but none of them really knew. Mr. Holden gave him a thumbs up from near the bleachers, mouthing something that looked like, "You've got this," but the words disappeared in the noise. Patrick just nodded. He didn't trust himself to speak. His heart wasn't pounding anymore. It was sitting still, like it was holding its breath. Across the gym, Logan Pike leaned against the edge of a chair, laughing too loud at something his friend whispered in his ear. Logan was wearing a hoodie, one sleeve pulled up to show a band bracelet, like he'd ever been to a real fundraiser. He caught Patrick's eye, smirked, and saluted. Patrick looked away. The principal's voice came over the mic, testing, cracking through the system before she officially began. "Good morning, Roosevelt Middle School," Mrs. Merriweather said, smoothing her blazer with both hands. "Thank you for being here, as we honor the men and women who've served our country with bravery and selflessness. Today is about remembering not just the uniforms, but the lives behind them, the families, the stories." The room quieted. Even the usual fidgeters settled down. "We are honored to have with us a very special guest this year," she continued, "a highly decorated officer who's traveled here just to speak with you about the meaning of service." Patrick felt his lungs tighten. Was it him? He scanned the crowd. A few adults sat behind the students, most in dress blues or clean polos, but no one he recognized. His eyes landed on the double doors at the back of the gym, closed. Had he been wrong? Was it just some generic colonel who got assigned to speak to schools like this? Mrs. Merriweather turned to gesture toward the podium. "Please join me in welcoming Colonel Matthew Riley." Applause. A ripple. Someone clapped too loud in the back. A few whistles. Patrick stared at the stage. And then, there he was. Colonel Riley wasn't what most of the kids expected. No sunglasses, no robotic stiffness. Just a tall man with a close-cropped haircut, eyes that had clearly seen too much, and a chest full of medals that made the light catch fire when he walked. But when he stepped up to the microphone, he didn't puff up his chest. He didn't rattle off his rank or talk about heroism. He looked at the students, let the silence hang, then began with a voice quieter than expected, steady, calm. "I'm here today for one reason," he said, "and it's not to talk about myself." Patrick leaned forward in his seat. "There's a boy in this room who's been carrying the weight of a truth that too many people have questioned," the colonel said. "A name that deserves to be honored, not doubted. That boy is Patrick Johannes." The sound moved through the crowd, like a wave sucked back before it crashes. Logan blinked. His mouth opened, shut again. Patrick didn't move. He wasn't sure he could. Colonel Riley looked directly at him. "I served with Staff Sergeant Daniel Johannes," he said, each word sharp and deliberate. He was more than a soldier. He was the kind of man who ran toward danger when the rest of us were still trying to figure out what direction it was coming from. Patrick's vision blurred, the gym faded, and it was just him and the voice and the memory of his dad's boots in the hallway late at night. "In Afghanistan, during Operation Iron Watch, our unit came under fire," the colonel continued. "We were outnumbered, we were surrounded, and it was Daniel Johannes who volunteered to flank the enemy, alone, so we could evacuate the wounded." The gym was silent. Not a chair shifted, not a single cough. "He saved all of us. Every one of us in that unit owes our lives to him. He didn't make it back, but because of him, we did." Someone sniffled in the row behind Patrick. "He was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Cross," Colonel Riley said, "and I have carried the memory of that day and that man every day since. And I carry it here, today, for his son." Patrick felt a hand rest on his shoulder. "Mr. Holden." He hadn't even realized the teacher had moved. "I came here today," the colonel said, "not just to speak, but to bear witness, to say to everyone here, on the record and without question, Patrick Johannes told you the truth." Then he stepped back from the mic. The silence lasted 3 full beats longer than it should have, and then the applause came. Not polite, not automatic, but real. Mrs. Merriweather wiped her eyes. A teacher stood, then another. By the time Patrick looked up, the entire 6th grade row was on their feet. Everyone but Logan Pike. Logan sat frozen, jaw slack, staring at the floor like the ground had shifted under him, and he didn't know how to stand on it anymore. Colonel Riley stepped down from the stage and made his way toward the students. Patrick's eyes locked with his, wide and stunned. The colonel extended his hand. Patrick stood. Their handshake lasted longer than it needed to. "I knew your dad," Colonel Riley said, barely above a whisper. "He talked about you all the time." Patrick tried to respond, but no words came, just a nod, tight and trembling. The colonel leaned in. "You made him proud today." And for the first time in weeks, Patrick Johannes smiled. After the assembly, no one rushed for the doors. Usually, kids spilled out of those metal chairs like water through a busted dam, eager to get back to whatever part of school didn't involve speeches or sitting still. But this time they lingered. A few whispered. Some just stared at Patrick Johannes like they were seeing him for the first time, not as the quiet boy with the army jacket and solemn eyes, but as someone tethered to something real, something bigger than they had imagined. Patrick stood beside Colonel Riley near the edge of the stage, their silhouettes outlined by the morning sun cutting through the high gym windows. Principal Merriweather hovered nearby, tissues bunched in one hand, mascara slightly smudged at the edges. "You all right, Patrick?" she asked gently. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Colonel Riley placed a hand on his shoulder again. "He's more than all right." Students began approaching. Some just said thank you and moved along. A few offered awkward high fives or nods that carried more weight than they probably knew how to give. And then came Logan Pike. His hands were stuffed deep in his hoodie pockets, his mouth a tight line. He walked slowly, like the floor had turned to glass, and he wasn't sure if it would hold. For a moment, it looked like he might just keep walking. But he stopped, 2 feet away from Patrick, eyes flicking between the boy and the colonel. "I didn't know," Logan muttered. Patrick didn't say anything. Logan looked down, then back up, his voice lower. I shouldn't have said what I said. Any of it. You thought wrong, Colonel Riley cut in. Not unkind, but not soft either. Logan swallowed. Yeah, I did. He turned back to Patrick. I'm sorry. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was honest, and that was enough. Patrick nodded. Okay. Logan stood there a second longer. Then he stepped aside and walked away, slower than usual, shoulders smaller than they'd ever looked. By the time the gym had cleared, only a few staff members and parents remained. Patrick's mom had slipped in near the end of the assembly, standing near the exit in her VA uniform, hands over her mouth the entire time. Now she walked over, eyes shining. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered, voice catching. "Your dad would have—" But she couldn't finish the sentence. Patrick stepped into her hug without a word, burying his face against her shoulder. For the first time in a long time, the ache in his chest loosened. The jacket he wore, his dad's jacket, didn't feel so heavy anymore. Principal Merriweather tapped the microphone once more, clearing her throat. "If I could have just one more moment," she said. "There's something else we'd like to do." Everyone quieted again. She turned to Colonel Riley. "Colonel, would you join me by the front table?" He did, and from beneath the red, white, and blue cloth that covered it, she pulled out a rectangular wooden plaque, polished, engraved, heavy with intent. "We believe actions deserve remembrance," she said, "and we believe that truth, once revealed, deserves a place that cannot be ignored." She turned the plaque outward so everyone could see. "In honor of Staff Sergeant Daniel Johannes, Distinguished Service Cross recipient. Gave all so others could live. Roosevelt Middle School Veterans Memorial. Established by his son, Patrick Johannes." Gasps rippled across the small crowd. Patrick's knees went a little weak, but he didn't sit. Colonel Riley took the plaque in both hands, turning it gently, then looked down at Patrick. "I'd like to dedicate this with you," he said. Together they walked to the east hallway, the quiet corridor by the school library where portraits of past principals hung, a dusty glass case for old trophies, a space no one really noticed. Until now, Colonel Riley mounted the plaque himself, centered beneath an American flag that had been folded into a triangle and placed inside a display frame. He adjusted it until it was perfectly level, then stepped back. Patrick stared at it, his father's name carved in oak, sealed behind glass, eternal. Mr. Holden appeared beside him, camera in hand. "You want a picture?" Patrick looked at his mom. She nodded, eyes damp. They posed, Patrick, Colonel Riley, and his mom. No forced smiles, just quiet pride. After the photo, Mr. Holden pulled something from his messenger bag and handed it to Patrick. "I thought you might want this," he said. "It's from the archives, your dad's official record. Deployment history, commendations, the medal review. I had to go digging, but you deserve it." Patrick took the folder with trembling hands. Inside, his father's life unfolded in pages. Not rumor, not memory, but proof. He didn't cry. Not until they got home and he laid it out on the kitchen table, touching each page like he was tracing footsteps left behind. The next day, the school announced something new. Every Veterans Day going forward, Roosevelt Middle School would host a day of service in the name of Staff Sergeant Johannes. Students would volunteer in the community, veterans would be invited to speak, and the gym wouldn't just hold assemblies anymore. It would hold memory, purpose. Patrick walked the halls that Friday differently. Kids nodded to him. Teachers called him sir, half joking, half not. Even Logan offered a seat at his lunch table. Patrick didn't take it, but he said thanks. In social studies, Mr. Holden started class with a quote written in chalk. "Some names are carved into stone, others are carried in the hearts of those who refuse to forget." He didn't say where it came from. He didn't need to. Because Patrick Johannes knew, deep in his chest, that his dad's name was no longer something to defend. It was something the world finally stood up to remember.